What is happening, internet? I finally earned the platinum for Genshin Impact, and I am going to be talking about this game by doing a bit of a review. And because of how absolutely massive the game is, both in terms of the number of characters, the unique things that those characters add, but also just how absolutely massive the map is as well, mind you. Like, I can only really talk so much about this whole game in a single review, so I'm just going to try and hit on some of the main points that I would talk about in any other game review, and maybe bring up some unique elements of this game in particular, like gameplay wise, how the game works from a gameplay perspective and things like that. But I'm only going to be able to cover so much, so bear with me as I try to tackle just as much as I can while not having written any sort of script, because like I said, all of my videos are always off the top of my head, including this review. So I'm going to go through things as much as I can off the top of my head. I'm sure there's going to be stuff that I'm going to miss, so I'm just basically prefacing all of that here in this first minute and a half. With that being said, however, let's talk about Genshin Impact. So, for those of you guys that don't already know, Genshin Impact is an action RPG. Basically, the game itself is an action-oriented game, with most of the upgrades for characters being very sort of what you would expect to see from an RPG. Now, what makes this game particularly unique from a gameplay perspective is the use of elements, basically elemental resonances. So every character has an element attached to them, and so from there, basically if you're attacking with the character and you're not using the elemental abilities, you are in fact playing the game completely wrong. Because say for example, I use my character as an example, so I'm using Arlecchino here. If I did a normal attack without any elemental, without, using any fire attacks of hers, so my R2 or my triangle like that, she'll deal some amount of damage, but she'll deal significantly more if I use my R2 or my triangle button moves, because my triangle is the elemental burst and the R2 is the, hold on, give me a second, I need to double check this before I actually make a fool of myself, because I actually don't really use any of the terminology for this. So if I go to talent, yep, so the elemental skill is the R2 and the elemental burst is the triangle. The burst is kind of like, think of it as like the ultimate move that you can use over and over again. Those will deal more damage, but then how do you deal even more damage on top of dealing damage with a single element? Is by mixing elements up. So here I am using electro, or an electric element, in addition to fire, allows me to basically use something like overload as an example, which deals additional damage on top of the damage I'm already dealing. So that's basically the main idea behind elemental resonances. You combine different elements together in order to deal significantly more damage. Now that is the main combat gameplay, but it's worth keeping in mind that most of the map when you first start playing is going to be completely blanked out, like we see here in this region here. So I haven't really gone through much of Natland here. So what I'm going to be doing is just going to like one waypoint to another, because these waypoints are basically the best way to be able to actually traverse the map, because you're not going to be traveling from place to place over and over again. Once you've reached a new location in the game, because only a small area will even be available to you from the beginning of the game, you'll slowly open up the map, have more teleport waypoints available to you, and ultimately that's just going to help you get from point A to point B a lot faster after the fact. And what I would say is that the exploration is nice and all, and the combat is also nice and all, but there's a lot of negatives to be talked about when it comes to the game. Because the thing is that I'm actually not a fan of a lot of what this game does. Firstly, acquiring additional characters. You will earn a few of them through story-related progression, but a decent amount of characters are not going to be earnable unless you roll for those characters in with the gacha system. Now, for what it's worth, The gacha system in this game is at least alright, but that's all I'm committed to saying at this point. It's not as bad as what other games could be, but that's because it's improved over time. At the launch of this game, the gacha system was very, very bad. You could spend a ton of money and not even get the character that you want. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the gacha system, just period. Getting good weapons as well can also be earned through the gacha system, which I also am not a fan of. The map size is extremely large, but that's only because the game has gotten bigger over time. So that's both a good and a bad thing, because it shows that the developers are actually willing to put the time and energy into actually making the map bigger, adding more story beats to the story and things along those lines. However, if you're a new player, you are absolutely going to be completely lost. And so it's better to follow the game's story and unlock new areas as you go through it from there. That being said, the story is not particularly good. In fact, I don't actually like the story all that much, if I'm being completely honest. It's just alright. Like, it's fine for what it's worth. And that's all it really serves to do. It's just fine. Because sometimes when the story feels like it's being relatively strong, it just kind of gets let down. Basically, to give you an idea, the entire world of Teviat, which is where the game of Genshin Impact takes place, basically is split into multiple nations. And think of like each nation as like another chapter of the game's story. By going through each of the nation's stories, which is basically like a single chapter of the story, like I said, you'll meet new characters, you may unlock some new characters, but that'll be the main way in which you'll be following the entire unlocking of the entire region. Of course, you could go out of your way and start like, exploring as much as you like, similar to like how Zelda Breath of the Wild and how Tears of the Kingdom do it. But this is just perfectly fine. Like, I think Zelda did do a better job as far as exploration goes in this game, or rather in this style, I should say. That being said, wait, do I need to go up or do I need to go in? Yeah, basically there are puzzles everywhere and there's things to discover everywhere in the game. There's hundreds if not thousands of treasure chests per area and location in the game. There's a lot of good stuff all around, but the size of the map is just like that. It's usually a nice big map size is usually pretty good, but the problem is that the map is too big. That's where we're at with this game at the moment, and it looks like it's going to keep increasing as time goes on, because it looks like, the devs don't have any need to want to decrease the amount of development they're doing for the game as well. That being said, I also completely forgot to show that I did earn almost all the trophies in the game. I'm just missing one silver trophy for reaching level 10 reputation in Fontaine, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks I should have that earned. But yeah, the game itself is perfectly fine for the most part. Like, I don't hate the game by any means, but there are lots of things that I'm not a fan of. And that's, easier said than done, I guess, to make like, a really good game. That being said, let's talk about character upgrades. Now that I've talked about sort of character story to some very minute extent without going into any details, because certain, locations have a particularly good story going on, but then the overarching story seems to just be put into the background more often than not. So let's talk character upgrades, because you're going to have to pull for characters in the gacha system, which is referred to as a wish. And of course, if you want to get really, really good weapons, you'll have to do that the exact same way. But with that being said, when you get those characters, you'll need to upgrade them. And so there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ways you can upgrade characters, though there are 4 that you'll want to focus on if you are wanting to get through as much of the game and do some decent amount of end-game content without having to rely on, buying characters over and over again. The first thing is a character's level. So on the top right, you can see Arlecchino is level 90, but maybe I'll use, I don't know, Yaya as an example. So basically, she's only level 1 here. But of course, you can max out your characters at level 90, but you do need to make a decent amount of progression to even reach that point, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about. but with how long it takes to get to that point, it's extremely grindy and time consuming, and it does require you to come back day after day in order to get to the point where you can actually level up your characters as high as that. Same thing can be said for the level of weapons, which is the second thing you would want to increase the level of. Once you've increased your character's level as high as you can go, the weapon is the next thing. Again, that can also be leveled up to level 90 as well. Then the third thing that you'll be leveling up is going to be talents. Talents are basically attached to each thing that your character does. The first one will always be the normal attack, the second thing will be the elemental skill, and the third thing will be the elemental burst. Each of these things, if you upgrade them, will either become stronger, deal more elemental damage, just be significantly more beneficial. And it does make a big difference. So increasing your character level and increasing your weapon level is all well and good, but increasing your talent levels actually creates a significantly larger improvement on your character as a whole. The next thing you'll probably be doing is getting artifacts. Now, what are artifacts? They're basically additional items that you can equip onto your character, and if you can get a set of similar artifacts together, you'll basically be able to get additional effects off of those artifacts. And also the stat increases that you get from artifacts are all randomly generated, unless you keep grinding over and over again to get the exact stats that you want. So everything here is completely randomly generated in terms of the stats that you get. So if we look at, for example, the wine flask over which the plan was hatched is a goblet from the Unfinished Reverie set, and that defense 17.5%, critical damage, energy recharge, and attack stat increases have all been kind of randomly determined when I originally got the actual artifact, and the increases of each of those stats were also randomly done as I was leveling this thing up from level 0 to level 20, or plus 20 I should say. So you can see some of these here are plus 0, this Wandering String Kettle for example, but this one that's equipped currently is a plus 20. So these substats are randomly generated alongside a potentially randomly generated main stat increase that is always increased per level. So in this case, it's pyro damage bonus. But yeah, so I hate this system completely because the stuff that you want to get. So firstly, the artifact in question that you want to get is randomly generated, like the type of artifact, like what set that artifact belongs to, because specific sets give you specific bonuses. Then the main stat of that artifact is randomly generated, and then the substats are also randomly generated. And if you want to min-max this game, you are going to min-max an absolute migraine for yourself instead. I absolutely hate the system altogether, and I cannot recommend that any other games do the system. Unfortunately, Hoyoverse has released multiple games that have the same system, so I've now at this point become completely accustomed to it. That's not to say that I still don't absolutely dislike it. That being said, those are the 4 main things that you'd want to increase and kind of min-max to some extent if you want to do some of the end-game stuff. But if you have way too much money to spend, Lord knows why, because I wish you'd be giving me that money instead, we have constellations. So what are constellations? Well, I'll bring up Navia as an example here. I've got one of her constellations. Basically, when you earn a 5-star character or a 4-star character through through things like pulling for them through wishes, if you get them the first time, basically they're added to your roster. However, if you get them multiple times throughout multiple pulls, you'll get their constellations instead, which are basically copies of the original character, and they give you additional abilities. Now, I said that artifacts and talents greatly increase your character in terms of like stats and the amount of damage they do and things like that. Constellations is the biggest difference maker when it comes to a character upgrade. Unfortunately, you have to pay real money to get to the point where you're actually able to get characters and their constellations. And the reason why I'm using Navia specifically as an example is A, I have one of her constellations, and B, she is in fact currently available as one of the characters as part of the event Wish, albeit for like a few days. But basically, yeah. If I kept trying to pull for her, I could get additional constellations and be able to upgrade her to the point where she'll become completely unrecognizable had I increased everything else and remained at a C0. So C0 means I have no constellations for the character, but currently my Navia does have one constellation, so she is a C1. By the time you get to C6, which is the 6th constellation for all of these characters, well, like I said, day and night difference in terms of how you expect the character to basically function, and are basically overpowered. So that's why paying money to get characters and weapons and things like that is encouraged by the game, even though I would never ever recommend that, because the thing is that constellations have actually never benefited me, despite the fact that I have, completed a lot of the post game content that I would have expected to see otherwise. So yeah, not a fan of that at all. And of course the game does have something called a Gnostic Hymn, which is basically the battle pass for this game, and of course you can get additional weapons and things like that if you go for the paid battle pass track, but like I said, you can do that if you want to. I don't recommend it. The free pass just has enough, but certain weapons are hidden behind the paid version of the pass that I did end up getting, like for example the Sacrificial Jade and other weapons that I can see here. In fact, I think, no, Sacrificial Jade might be the only one that I got from here for Nouvellette, I think. But yeah, so that's basically the game in a nutshell. I am not a fan of a lot of what this game does, but I also think that this game is just fine. I think that you could spend a lot of time playing this game, and it does hold a ton of value. I feel like you could play this game without paying a cent and you would be none the wiser about it, because you'll still be able to play this game and be able to enjoy a lot of, if not all of, the content that the game has to offer. The game looks absolutely stunning from a visual perspective, but because I have a bunch of overpowered characters, and this might be deemed as another negative, well, the thing is that if you have an overpowered set of characters, the gameplay and the battle aspects of the game do get incredibly boring. Constantly traveling from place to place also can get quite boring as well. So it's definitely a game that you want to play sort of in short bursts every now and again if you do want to sit down and actually enjoy it. But way too many play this game already, so I think making a review of it is completely redundant and just doesn't make any sense. So why am I doing this? Hell, it's probably just for me, if I'm being completely honest. That I'm just kind of doing this for myself. And of course, each nation has their own various elements to them. Say for example, in the case of Natland here, where I'm transforming into basically like the Pokemon wildlife of this area, and that is something unique you can't do in other regions of the world, or in Fontaine, which is the land of water, and the fact that you can kind of swim everywhere and dive underwater, which is fairly unique in that area. There are small mechanical unique aspects to the game sort of here and there, but yeah, I don't think that really adds too much to the game, if I'm being completely honest. It's just more of a that's cool. But with all that being said, however, let me know what you guys think about Genshin from anything that I've said or explained, and I hope that I've kind of at least been able to shine a bit more aspects of the game that people may not know about if they weren't already partaking in the game itself. And I know that doing a review in 2025 seems extremely redundant when the game came out in 2020, but the thing is that back then they only had like Mondstadt as a region. So just to kind of give you a bit of an idea, when the game originally launched, if I just completely zoom out, the only amount of the game that was currently available is here, where we have Starfell Valley, Whalewind Highland, and maybe Bright Crown Mountains, but definitely these two areas. I'm not too sure about Gale Song Hill, but that's all the game had originally when the game first launched. And now we're at a point where, like, with additional patches and things like that, and updates, the game has, increased so much more. And in fact, there's also another negative point that I wanted to mention, and that's the delivery method for this game is probably one of the worst that I've ever seen, where like we'll give you a small game, we'll give you like a small bit of the game to start off with, and then we'll keep developing everything thereafter. and release them slowly as time goes on. Granted, over time, this will make the game significantly better and a lot more fun, but the thing is that original offering just makes it seem very like redundant. Why not just wait until you've, developed everything, but then does that become a bit too much or things along those lines? Maybe that's just a completely redundant complaint, to be completely honest, but yeah. I guess that's just kind of my final thoughts on the game. But with all that being said, let me know what you guys think about all of this. This was a beefy video, but there was a lot to talk about, and there's a lot to this game, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of stuff that I also missed in between. But with all that being said, however, let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel. I'm aiming for 500 subs by the end of the year. With all that being said, I do upload every day, so I'll see you guys tomorrow.